Welcome to The Nation. I'm Rachel Smalley. Oil and gas exploration, it's critical to the country's economic growth, or so says National, but there is huge opposition to it. So how does the government overcome red tape and public opposition to mining? The Minister in charge is here to meet the press. Let's welcome first our journalists, Alex Tarrant from interest.co.nz and John Hartevelt, Fairfax media political journalist. Welcome to you both. And Energy and Resources Minister Phil Heatley, thanks for coming in this morning.
My pleasure.
I'd like to start with a quote, if I could, from Cameron Bagri, the economist from the ANZ National Bank. He quoted a World Bank study which said that New Zealand had the eighth highest in the world per capita, or was the eighth highest in the world per capita in terms of resources. That figure does include water, but nonetheless there's this extraordinary level of natural minerals here. At the same time, we really push our 100% pure approach. How do you balance those two?
Yeah, now that's right. So we've got, for example, 18 explorable basins in New Zealand in terms of oil and gas, exploration basins, and we only produce out of one of them, and that's in the Taranaki. So Taranaki has quietly, over the last 50 to 100 years actually, Maui's been going for 50, successfully had an oil and gas industry tucked alongside the dairy industry and a tourism industry, and no one in New Zealand's heard a peep out of them. You know, there's never been any problem. They've worked together beautifully. The average salary in Taranaki is about $75,000, and it's pulled up because of oil and gas. And what we're saying is to New Zealanders is, look, if Taranaki can do it so quietly, so successfully, without any hassle for all these decades, why can't these other 17 basins across New Zealand do it? Particularly in the East Coast, you know, where there's a lot of poverty, the South Island, Northland. I mean, it's crazy. And I just, every time the Greens point to some international example of something that's happened, I say, well, wait a minute, in the Taranaki, in our own backyard, Maui gas, New Zealand made, we can do more of that stuff.
Maui gas is only about 100 metres deep, though, isn't it? What we're talking about, and if we really want to scale up here, you are talking about over 1,000 metres. What's our practical capability to deal with the worst-case scenario? Yeah,
well, I've opened up 23 areas across New Zealand where we're going to do exploration. Most of it's in Taranaki, but in other parts of the country. But much of it's on land, and some is at sea. So not all of it's deep sea. The reality is that international oil companies do it in the deep sea all over the world, like the North Sea, for example. Now, you couldn't imagine a more cleaner and greener country besides New Zealand than Norway. Norway is built off the back of oil and gas exploration in the North Sea, rough waters, deep, and never had an incident in terms of oil spills. And I'm just saying these are the same companies that can do it in New Zealand. We've just got to make sure that our regulations, environmental regulations, are fit for purpose and keep them to account.
Regulations, fine, but what about practical ability to deal with the worst case scenario? So what about, for instance, a relief well? We know the closest relief well, I understand, is the capability to dig for one is in Perth.
Right.
And that's clearly going to take a heck of a long time to get over to New Zealand if the worst happens.
Yeah, so the first thing is to make sure that nothing happens, and, you know, oil companies have got to do that, and they do it internationally, and we'd expect them to do that in the regimes there. In terms of if anything does go wrong, we've had a review of our capability in New Zealand and are confident that we've got the equipment in New Zealand and offshore and we can bring it in. But we're currently actually talking to the Australians at the moment about working even more closely with the capping device, which is now in Singapore, which could be brought over in a matter of days. We've got to work out how that's going to work for New Zealand. So we're a long way, you know, these conversations are happening a long way before any deep sea drilling will occur. So consents now, the drilling may not occur for 5 years. We've got a lot of lead-in time to work through these things.
Is it going to be a case of the oil companies having to contribute to this as well through fees and payments and stuff, or is it generally just a government response to spills? How are you going to approach it with, as we look to well these 17 wells offshore? Then
yeah, so one of the things we're doing in the law change, which I'll be announcing in the next few weeks in the Crown Minerals Act, will be making operators accountable for the design, for the installation and for the monitoring of their wells, and have regulation around that. So they will need to put up a safety case scenario of exactly what they do in every single circumstance. Now, a good example of that is Mars Marsden Point oil refinery. Now, it's not drilling, but they have a tanker coming in and out every week, an oil tanker. They have for 50 years. It's 2,500 oil tankers that have come out of Marsden Point for 50 years while the people of Whangarei have been sleeping and going to work. Now, the reason why it's been so successful is they've planned it, they've got a safety case around it. Anything goes wrong, they're onto it. And we're saying when it comes to deep sea oil and gas exploration, they need the same plans in place. They need to operate just like Marsden Point does, very carefully. There's a plan for every scenario.
Let's move on to fracking if we can, Minister. The Dunedin City Council this week has announced a moratorium on it. We know when it came to Solid Energy seeking a resource consent, Environment Waikato wasn't too concerned about that. There's real inconsistencies across the regions here. Why is that?
Taranaki Regional Council is the main council that's had to deal with hydraulic fracking historically. So they've dealt with it for 2 or 3 decades. So it's been going on in Taranaki. No one's had any particular concerns. And when I talk to the regional council,
pretty much unregulated, hasn't it? Though.
Well, they're saying they've been regulating and monitoring it, and I guess they're the independent body, and I take their word and their paperwork for that. But what we need to do is to make sure that other regions, when they start getting into the space that Taranaki's been in for decades, have the expertise, not just from industry in Taranaki to other areas, but from the regional council part there and the monitoring bodies. And we've actually also found that iwi in some areas of New Zealand are taking much more interest in oil and gas because they've been talking to the iwi in Taranaki. So what I'm saying is it's learning from that.
Do you have a national policy, though, on this?
Yeah, well, the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment's looking at hydraulic fracturing at the moment about, how if it needs to be regulated differently or companies need to do more and that type of thing. So she's going to report back at the end of the year, and she takes her job pretty seriously. So her recommendations I'm going to be taking very, very seriously. She may ask for the regulations to be changed, and I'm open to that.
Would that be fairer for miners to know that there's a national approach?
Yeah, I think that is an argument they've certainly put to me. They've said, look, we've done it in Taranaki forever. There's never been a problem. Why should it be any different in the rest of New Zealand?
That argument?
Well, I understand why they might want consistency across the country, but the reality is the rock types and the soil types and even the communities have a different view. So you've got to be a bit careful when you have a sort of a one-size-fits-all.
But they want the power taken away from local government and given to central government.
Yeah, I understand that, and you can't go that far entirely because the reality is local communities should have a say.
OK, let's look at the issue of Bathurst as well. This is the Buller Coke and Coal project. They've spent millions trying to get set up on the Denniston Plateau. It just keeps going back and back to court. And I think it's going back to court on Monday with the environmentalists are arguing that you have to take into account global warming. I think it's pretty extraordinary. Does the Resource Management Act essentially allow environmentalists to delay something like this going forward? Yeah,
well, we're getting similar frustrations from the oil and gas and mining industries that we're getting from, large property developers and people who want to consent wind farms. And that is that when you've got a regionally significant project, it's just crazy that you just get taken back to court time and time again, which is what's happened to them. So they won in court.
What's the fix then?
What's that?
What's the fix?
Oh, the fix, we think, we've been for nationally significant projects like Waterview, the road. We've used the national consenting process where we call it in, and with a 9-month sort of turnaround time. What we're considering at the moment is when you've got very significant projects sort of at a regional level, whether we can have a similar system. And it might be a turnaround time of something like 6 months, and it's only challengeable on points of law.
What have you got for Bathurst? I mean, these people are losing millions of dollars in the 2 years that they've been waiting to get this up and running, and the government's out here. I mean, the Prime Minister opened the offices for them.
That's right.
What have you got for them?
Well, they're obviously hanging in there. I only met with them last week, actually, and they are tremendously frustrated. The reality at the moment is we've got a court system where people can continue to oppose, and what we're saying is, well, maybe we need to bring in a consenting system where it essentially goes, you have a first chance, last chance in court. It's only appealable on points of law, and then the answer is either yes or no, and you can get on with it.
Never again. There will never again, as far as a national government is in power, there will never again be a case of a 2-year delay.
I simply couldn't guarantee that because we can't control the courts, and we don't want to control the courts.
But you're looking at legislation to try and control that process.
So Amy Adams, the Environment Minister, is looking at legislation on, well, I'm going to call it loosely, regionally significant projects. I don't think she'd use that turn of phrase, but where they're substantial, they're regionally sort of significant, my turn of phrase, and we're looking at a way in where we can make the decision-making a lot cleaner and simpler. Now, I must stress that we're not about the decision being yes. The decision might be no, but at least there's certainty.
And speed.
Yeah,
but surely
correct.
Bathurst and mining decisions, your government has put a huge emphasis on mining. Surely these are decisions of national significance if we were to follow the National Party's 120-point plan. This is quite high up there. So why can't you do what you did with Waterview with cases like Bathurst?
Well, some are and some aren't, and I mean it depends how large scale the property development or the mining venture is. And the reality is we don't think that many of them cut the sort of national test, but they might cut some sort of regionally significant test.
But adding them all together, they're supposed to be nationally significant. You expect royalties to rise from $3 billion to $12 billion. How is that going to happen if you just pussyfoot around with environmental groups?
Well, that's correct, but the reality is each of these development projects come on at a different time. They're unrelated. One might be after gold, one might be after oil and gas. So you can't sort of lump them in all together. So what we're saying is, look, if it's a really significant project in a region, huge amount of jobs, environmental concerns are significant, it might be something that shouldn't go through councils and all the rest of it.
You've mentioned legislation coming in the next couple of weeks. Is that going to have something in it that we can get more royalties from minerals?
Yeah. So what I'm going to be reporting back in the next few weeks is what our decisions are in terms of the Crown Minerals Act. I'm hoping legislation will actually hit the debating chamber in the next couple of months. Now, with that, we're going to be releasing a discussion paper on raising or changing the royalties around gold and silver and those types of minerals. We've already said that in terms of oil and gas, the industry already pays 42%, both company tax and royalties. It's already high enough. So oil and gas is pretty much off the table. It's gold and silver and those other minerals that we're
really
interested
underdone on those, aren't we?
What's that?
We're really underdone.
Yeah, well our view is, we're yet to do the review, obviously, and go out for consultation and get a sort of, do the real number crunching. But my sense is oil and gas, in terms of, we're quite isolated in New Zealand, so we've got to be a bit careful to attract the companies here. You can't have it too high. So oil and gas is
but the oil's not moving,
right.
Is it?
No, well, no. But the oil and gas is pitched about right. But gold and silver, the gold price has changed since it was last set. Some of those other minerals, iron, sand. So no. Look, we think there'll be changes.
So what kind of rises are we going to see? It's going to be up?
Well, I can't pick it, but it is going up. The reality is we're not going out to New Zealanders and saying, look, here's a big opportunity. We've done it properly in the past. We can do it in other parts of the country, and then be concerned about that without getting the gains from royalties. We simply have to get the gains. So that's the argument, really. If we're going to do this stuff, there has to be a return.
How determined are you to essentially tap into the country's mineral wealth here? Because are we going to see a U-turn at all, or is this going to happen?
No, we're very, very determined. We've already made a decision that we're not going to be mining on Schedule 4 land, which is high-value national parks and that type of thing. But the reality is everyone's screaming out for jobs. We want new schools and hospitals. Here's an opportunity. We've done it well in Tarrant and other places. Let's do it elsewhere.
OK, we have to pause there. We will return to our interview with Phil Heatley after the break, when we'll ask him about his other big portfolio, housing. Should the government intervene in the market and make housing more affordable for all New Zealanders? That's next on The Nation.